these people become very easy to control, and they turn against their own government. This has prevailed over hundreds of years and continues even today. This could be why the white race is considered superior. How could other societies possibly develop when they are constantly being occupied, confused, derailed, misguided? I mean, the point is, though, that anyone could have done it. You know, these techniques and resources didn't simply spring up from the supposedly exceptionally developed white mind. I mean, this is an accumulation of trials and attempts over hundreds of years. Europe was entangled in battles amongst itself, religious crusades, cultural revolutions, and all due to an insatiable hunger for more power. And that while the rest of the world attempted to coalesce where they could and otherwise benefit from their abundant resources and sustain their own massive empires, Europe was teaching itself through the spilling of millions of gallons of its own blood and those around them until they had perfected the art of conquest. At the same time, they visited other nations and took what they could in order to further their goal. Gunpowder from China, the use of prevailing winds from the Middle East, literacy and civilization from the Moors, and many, many other foreign inventions and innovations. Indeed, without the rest of the world, the divine white skin would be nothing but skin sans melanin. So then what is all this race nonsense about? Now, the first thing that people tend to turn to when questioning the validity of a concept is the scientific study of the matter and the subsequent conclusions therefrom. Such always seems to be the case with race, and the general belief is that science has hitherto concluded that race is a viable taxonomy on the premise that there are distinct and significant variations between proposed races. One article in defense of the race concept suggests that studying physiological variances between races could effectively benefit medical science in that the treatment could be developed for specific demographics that would better suit their needs. This is a very compelling argument that not only would validate the division of races, but would also apply in a positive way. So I was all for it. Still, this sort of thought only reaffirms a human division nonetheless, where no real human division exists. Now, you know, I was all for it only up to a point, because the fact is that, you know, when you're basing it on a premise that is fallacious, you're basing it on something imaginary, and therefore your entire premise is bullshit. Essentially, it was nonsense. So, you know, the base variations on human physiology on a fallacious taxonomy is myopic and naive because we're not truly realizing the reasons for these variations. Now, allow me to explain. In the same article, which was titled "The Ethnic Differences in Bone Mineral Densities Were Identified in Chinese American Women," it was released in Medicine and Law Weekly, July 21st, 2006. A sample of Chinese American women were found to have significantly lower bone mineral density than those in a Caucasian female database. A bone mineral density, I don't expect anybody to be some sort of you know, physiologist or anthropologist or anything. So basically, it determines how dense your bone is, how liable it is to break, how close you are to getting osteoporosis, for example. You know, having a bone mineral deficiency is what osteoporosis is, etc. You know. The article rationalized the study by pointing out the diagnoses of postmenopausal osteoporosis can now be more accurate with this information. Notice first and foremost, though, that there's a distinct difference between a sample of 359 Chinese women and an entire database. And I mean, you know, 359 women may seem like a lot, but you have to understand that, especially considering that these are Chinese people that we're talking about, in China, there are over 1 billion Chinese people. Dude, that's a lot of people. 359 isn't even 0.1%. It doesn't really reflect anything, but more so, you know, this is also in comparison to an entire database. Who knows how many people are in that? Millions, thousands, hundreds of thousands? It's nothing. I mean, 359 is nothing in comparison to a database, but, you know, let's move on. But the real question was whether there are any other possible reasons as to why these women had BMD deficiencies aside from the fact that they were Chinese. Let's stay on point, right? So, according to the article, postmenopausal bone mineral density in relation to soy isoflavone metabolizing phenotypes in Science Direct, women who consume soy yet possess a phenotype that renders them incapable of excreting a chemical known as O-DMA have a significantly lower BMD, or bone mineral density. This article illustrated that white women, as well as Asian women, can possess this phenotype, but the demographic that is more likely to consume soy will be Asian women. And the reason why I use quotes with saying white people, and not with saying Asian, is because Asian, it relates to people who are from Asia, not Orientals, which I would never use because it's a racial division. I'm just talking about where these people are from. There's no Caucasia, there's no white land, nothing. These people are just considered white because that is the classification that they've been given in order to put them in a more positive light more than anything else. The article illustrated that white women as well as Asian women can possess this phenotype, but the demographic that is more likely to consume soy would be Asian women. There were other references, such as the published record of the experiment bone mineral density and bone turnover and hypoprolactinemia in various origins by M. Bolanowski, MD, and others that concluded that more than anything else, diet and weight influences BMD. Ergo, it would be more logical to consider what about Chinese Americans aside their Chineseness that lowers their postmenopausal BMD, and that information could be infinitely more beneficial than relying on conclusions derived from an experiment conducted within the scope of a faulty classification. Now, this is only one example, but the evidence that race is an empty and even arbitrary classification is scattered all throughout scientific studies. There are three factors of geography that may be attributed to race: physical barriers such as mountain ranges, oceans, desert regions, etc., the effect of geography on climate, which leads to the variation between species, and chemical or mineral variations on terrain and soil. An example could be the gradient in hair types and corresponding skin complexions in relation to climate. In colder parts of Europe, for example, you will find majority straight hair with lighter coloring, accompanied with lighter skin complexions. In the Mediterranean regions, though, you'll find curly hair and tan or olive skin. In the warmest of climates, where most people have very kinky hair and much darker skin. In terms of genetics, most human variation occurs within a population of a given area as opposed to in between what we consider to be races. According to various scientific sources, 94% of human variation occurs within each continent. In other words, a Russian is more likely to be genetically different from another Russian, or more so different than another Russian, than a Filipino. When one considers the facts with a critical eye and objective, even the socially conditioned classifications, the truth becomes painfully obvious. Race is bullshit. The last way we're going to approach this in terms of science is anthropologically speaking. Of course, the subject of race has been approached in the study of humans, or anthropology, as well as every other facet of science and psychology and philosophy and everything else. According to an explanation by Palomar College's anthropology department, or a chair,